After the battlefield of the courthouse, Lord Cornwallis headed north, and we know what happened to him at Yorktown. Major General Nathaniel Greene, the commander of the Southern Army, turned his face to the south with the intention of moving the British out of South Carolina. Now, he intended to attack the big posts and leave the smaller posts to militia commanders. To accomplish this, he sent Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lee down into the swamps to meet with Brigadier General Francis Marion. Now, the two had campaigned briefly in January, but now they would spend a good bit of time together. It is an unlikely pairing. You might say that Lee and Marion are the odd couple of the Revolution. Henry Lee was born into one of the first families of Virginia, born in his plantation home in the lower Potomac River. He was born to affluence, and he had every advantage that money and breeding could give him. He attended Princeton University and planned on going to England to study law when the war intervened. Now, he was a very successful commander in the North, a cavalry officer, brave and daring, and he had a great resume before he came to the South. He was handsome, refined, gallant, well-educated, but he was impulsive, brash, and arrogant. And he will tell you this evening, those traits may have caused him great difficulty in his later life. Francis Marion was very different. First, he was more than 20 years older than Lee. His family had become successful planters in the South through years of hard work and long hours. His schooling was minimal, but he had a fine career in the military as an officer in the 2nd South Carolina Regiment of the Continental Line, and after the fall of Charleston had gone into the swamp and had campaigned very successfully there. He was shorter than the average man, maybe not more than 5 feet tall. He was lean with deformed ankles and knees. His skin was dark and his face was ugly. He was quiet, secretive to the point of paranoia, intense, and introverted. But Lee and Marion did share some common traits. They were both ambitious, they were dedicated to Greene's strategy, they were single-minded in their goals, and they abhorred bloodshed unless it was the enemy's. They were protective of the men that they commanded and were unwilling to take needless risks. Lee had a great admiration for Marion. He wrote of him, Marion was small in stature, hard and vicious, healthy, abstemious, and taciturn. Nothing selfish, nothing mercenary soiled his ermine character. Never avoiding danger, he never wretchedly sought it. He risked the lives of his troops only when it was necessary. And Lee and Marion shared one other trait. Each, for good but possible different reasons, they despised Thomas Sumter. Lee wrote of Sumter, enchanted with the splendor of victory, he would wade through torrents of blood to attain it. Yes, Lee and Marion despised Sumter. Now, the circumstances of war threw Marion and Lee together, and as different as they were, they would make the most of it. After reducing Fort Watson, they moved to siege Fort Motte. And here they encountered Rebecca Motte, a lady from Charleston society, refined and intelligent, here at Motte to protect her family's home. But tonight we shall hear from Mrs. Motte, and she will speak for herself. Now tonight we will hear from 3 principals from Fort Motte. Francis Marion, in his later years, is portrayed tonight by Dr. Joe Stukes, a professor from Francis Marion University. He is a historian with a keen interest in Marion. Over the years, he has portrayed 50 historical personages to the delight and enlightenment of his students. Light Horse Harry Lee is portrayed by Howard Burnham, thespian and writer from England. He's an educator, researcher, and performer of British and American military figures, as well as American and British intellectuals and writers. Rebecca Motte is portrayed by Athena Westerern, who is a reenactor with the 2nd South Carolina Regiment of the Continental Line. She's a lecturer on colonial life in schools and a participant in living history events across the nation. She's portrayed 18th century personages at Saratoga, on the Washington Mall, at Williamsburg, and at probably every historical event in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Let me present for your pleasure Brigadier General Francis Marion.
Where's my old help? Oh, here. You know, Peter is coming to see me in a few minutes, he said. And I'm looking for him. But I'll talk to you while I'm waiting for him. I got out my old uniform. Peter O'Reilly was one of my best lieutenants. And we fell out near the end of the war. He got involved with Hezekiah Mayhem, and I had to make a decision between them. But we begun to make up. And I thought I'd wear my old helmet when Peter comes. You ought to be riding up out there. But I'll welcome you here to Pond Bluff. I'm sorry the house isn't better than it was. You know, during the war, the British occupied my house, and they just tore it up. And when I got back to the house, after all the fighting was over, there just wasn't any house left. They had also taken away most of my slaves. So we've had a hard time building it back. But I don't want to talk about that. Because Peter's coming, and we're going to remember the old days. You know, I really didn't know him until we got to fighting in the war. I had already been fighting. I fought against the Cherokees, you know, with Captain Moultrie, now General Moultrie. And then I fought down there at Sullivan's Island when the British thought they were going to capture Charleston in 1776. And I was with the 2nd Regiment. I was one of the first 10 captains in the 2nd Regiment. Even though, you know how my legs are, they were sort of malformed. I was born that way, my mother told me. One of my uncles said one time that I wasn't much bigger than a lobster when I was born. He thought I could fit into a quart pot. And my ankles never did really develop very well. And I'm afraid I never did look much like a soldier, even in the days when I was a soldier. But as I told you, I fought some, and I got involved in the 2nd Regiment, and eventually I came to command the 2nd Regiment. And mostly it happened after fighting around in Savannah and other places. And mostly it happened to me shortly after the Battle of Camden. You know, the British had come from Savannah and they had taken over Charleston, and from Charleston they had taken over the up country. George Washington sent a commander down, Gates. He was to be the commander of our troops. He was going to win the battles for us. This is in 1780. And it was right after we'd had a couple of defeats. In particular, Buford trying to run away, got up there at the Waxhaws, and Tarleton caught up with him. And Buford tried to surrender, and he got his men to spike their guns. And Tarleton came and massacred everyone, killed every one of them. You know, Charleston surrendered. The Waxhaw settlement happened. No quarter given by Tarleton. It looked like our attempts to fight the war's over. And there were great numbers of people in South Carolina who were signing the oaths of allegiance. And we heard that up in Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress was, that they were even planning to make peace with Britain by leaving the southern colonies as a part of Britain. You know, leaving Georgia and South Carolina and even North Carolina to belong to Britain. Things were bad. And in those days, I was hurt. I had fallen out of a window. I sort of jumped to try to get out of a party that I wasn't having a good time with, and it hurt a whole lot. And I jumped down, and I landed on my bad ankles, and I broke one of them. It's this one right here, and I still sort of drag it a little bit. Even though, that's been 12 years ago. Well, I went up to Camden, and I met with General DeKalb up there, and I tried to say to him, look, I'm the 2nd Regiment, and I'm reporting for duty. But they didn't really want me, and they didn't really want militia. General Gates, he sent word. He looked down on it, and he was glad to say to me, go down to Williamsburg and take charge of the Williamsburg militia. So I did. That was 1780. And from 1780 to the end of 1782, and part of the way in 1783, it wasn't but 2.5 years. That's when I did my best fight. That's when I learned how to fight against those British. Oh, man. Oh, man. I fought them at Nelson's Ferry, and I fought them at the Blue Savannah, and I got them at Black Mingo, and I got them in one place after the other, and finally, down to Fort Watson, Fort Motte. And the way to fight the British was to never really face them face on. The British were the best army in the world. And here we were, militiamen. We never had any military training. We just sort of learned it on our own. And that meant that we didn't have to learn it from people who were now old. We learned it on the spot. We made up our own strategy. And the strategy was to hit and run. To slash and vanish. And that's what it is. And I knew how to do it, too. And I was fighting in my backyard. I knew the geography. And I loved the swamps. Because I knew the British couldn't get into the swamps. They didn't know how to do that. And they always wanted to carry their big guns with them. And you can't carry big cannons through the swamp. Well, I had a few little cannons, but that's all. Well, we fought, and we fought. One time at Black Mingo, I led my troops in there. We surprised them at night. I had to muffle the horseshoes so they wouldn't make any noise crossing the bridge. We surprised them. We chased them out. And they were led by a Tory named Ball from that big Tory family. The nabobs from South Carolina. And I caught his horse, big, beautiful red horse, and I took him for my own. I still got it. You see him out there in the pasture. Oh, no, that's not Peter. I thought he was coming. Hey, I took that horse from my own. I rode him for the rest of the war. Called him Ball. Named him for the Ball family. Well, hit and run. That's the only way I could do it. And sometimes people would come down and tell me how to run things. And they didn't realize that I had developed my own system. And I was winning. General Greene finally came around to understand that. General Sumter, the trouble with General Sumter was, he was trying to do the same thing I was doing, and he wasn't as good at it as I was. But he had rank on me, he said. And he tried to give me orders. And sometimes, I just wasn't paying attention to the orders. Tried not to disobey orders, I just didn't obey orders. And sometimes people can't tell the difference between those two things. Well, they finally sent this fellow down here, General Lee. He was Colonel at the time. Colonel Lee. Henry Lee. At first, he and I didn't get along too well together. He's one of the rich men. aristocrat. He had manners and educated. He's one of my betters. But he didn't act like that to me. He didn't act like that to me. And he sort of knew what the problem was between us. I remember that time we were at Fort Motte, and we got that delightful lady, that Miss Rebecca Motte. She's just as fine a lady as I ever saw. And she said to us it'd be all right to burn her house so that we could get the British out of her house before the reinforcements came. But the question was, who's going to say to Miss Motte, hey, we want to burn down your house, lady? And I wasn't going to say that to Miss Motte. You know, she's one of those aristocrats, too. She was a brilliant before she got married. But Henry Lee said it. He went to her, and to my surprise, she immediately agreed to do that. And that's how we won the battle there. We called it Fort Motte. It was really her house, but they had fortified the house. I guess it was a fort. Well, we did well enough, I guess, until the war was over, and we were going to occupy Charleston again. Hey, I think I see him coming. I was a commander of the militia. I was also in the Continental Line, but my troops were militia troops. And I could tell they really didn't want the militia to occupy Charleston. They wanted the Continentals to occupy Charleston. General Greene came and he offered me a position in the line occupying Charleston. But I read between the lines and I knew about it. And I told him that the militia did not want to march. And so it didn't march. As a matter of fact, I told him that I heard there's smallpox in the city. And I didn't want to go. And then I bid farewell to my troops. I got this out to read it to Peter again, because he wasn't there that day. As to how I finally said to the troops that this is the final farewell. The final farewell. Let's see, I got it just somewhere. I'll read it to you. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. The general returns his warmest thanks to the officers and men who with unwavered patience and fortitude have undergone the greatest fatigue and hardships, and with a spirit and bravery which must ever reflect the highest honor on them. No citizens in the world have ever done more than they have. And that's so. I knew that. The general begs leave to give his particular thanks to all the officers and men of the country, of all the militia, for that partiality to his person and ready obedience to all orders for 2 years and a half, which will be remembered with gratitude to the end of his life. I remember it with gratitude. He'll always consider them with the affection of a brother, and will be happy to render them every service in his power. He cannot doubt in the least of their readiness to turn out should this country be ever again so unhappy as to be invaded by her cruel and barbarous enemies. He wishes them a long continuance of happiness and the blessings of peace. And the blessings of peace. That's a good thing. Wrote that myself. And I told it to them. And when I read it out to them, they cheered. And I got up astride Paul, and I came back here. Since that time I'm married, but last week we don't have any children. And nobody left named Marion. About 2 years ago, Esther and I adopted her grandnephew, whose name is Dwight. His name is Francis Marion Dwight. And the conditions on which we adopted him was that he'd change his name and he'd be known as Marion, so there'd be some descendants named Marion. And so maybe that'll be. Here comes Peter now. But you know who else is here? And somebody I want you to meet. Somebody I grew to like, even though he is an aristocrat. And even though he's not from South Carolina. And that's Henry Lee. He's Colonel Lee. We welcome him. He's going to come up here and talk to you. And I'm going to go and I'm going to find Peter. Thank you.
occasion, I shall rehearse to you my life and times. I was born Lee Sylvania, Dumfries, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in the year 1756, the year of the outbreak of the last of the French and Indian Wars, what the Europeans called the 7 Years' War. I was one of the Lees of Virginia, one of the oldest, finest families in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Lees originally came with William the Conqueror into England. Oh yes, we were decidedly blue-blooded. Also, I was educated at Princeton. Yes, I'm a Princeton man. I was about to continue my education at the Middle Temple in London. The outbreak, the troubles in the colonies kept me here to serve my country. When the war broke out, Patrick Henry put my name forward to be captain of Colonel Bland's regiment of Light Virginia Cavalry. I was posted north to serve under General Washington. The general wanted me to be one of his aides de camp, but I said, no, sir. I am married to my sword. I want a life of action, not a comfortable office job. I first rose to prominence at the Battle of Spread Eagle Town, January 1778, when that murderous butcher Charlton attempted to do a Charlie Lee on me. A month before, December, he had captured General Charles Lee at White's Tavern, Basking Ridge. And he and his dragoons tried to do the same thing to me. Me and my boys, we did not behave like Charlie Lee. We gave Tarleton buckshot, knocked his hat off, he galloped away with buckshot in his jacket. Would it have been in his heart? I next came to real prominence with my attack on Paulus Hook in New York. By that time, I'd been promoted to major, and I had raised an unusual organization known as Lee's Legion. 3 companies of light infantry and 3 troops of cavalry. We surprised the British and took 158 prisoners. Very successful raid, for which I received a gold medal from Congress. The only officer of major rank to receive such a distinction. My brother officers were intensely jealous. They attempted to have me court-martialed. General Washington wrote a letter in my support. Subsequently, with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, I was transferred to the Southern Department, where I made the acquaintance of that remarkable, valiant fighter, General Marion. Although we came from very different social classes, we worked hand in glove together against the British. First of all, we attempted to capture Georgetown. We succeeded in capturing the British commander there, Colonel Campbell. And we could have taken the town. We anticipated that the British would form into the square, as the Hessians had done at Trenton. The Redcoats barricaded themselves in their houses. We did not have cannon to flush them out. We decided that the bloody hand-to-hand street fighting would be too costly. I hate to spill blood unnecessarily, unless it is the blood of the enemies of my country. I subsequently served General Greene in the campaign that led to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. I was posted back to serve with General Marion. First of all, we invested and captured Fort Motte. And later, that most delightful and gracious of ladies, Mrs. Rebecca Motte, will rehearse to you in detail what happened on that occasion. Following the capture of Fort Motte, I I was sent to assist General Sumter capturing Fort Granby. And interestingly, at Fort Granby, there was another great patriotic American woman, Mistress Emily Giger. And I would like to rehearse to you now the story of Mistress Giger. She was commissioned by General Greene to carry a letter of instruction to General Sumter. But she had the great misfortune to be captured by a British patrol. And she was brought to Fort Granby for interrogation. Interrogation by Francis Lord Rawdon, who commanded there.
Oh, sir! Sergeant! Where is the little wig filly? Ah! Nice check. Rather pretty, what? Mistress, what's her name, Sergeant? Mistress Giger, my sergeant informs me that when you were arrested, you were seen to thrust a paper between your, wallets. I therefore desire you to, unbosom yourself. Oh, no, let's rephrase that. To unburden yourself on them. No, it.
Lordy, Sir Lord Rawdon, I didn't know such thing. Your sergeant must be mistaken. I have no paper about my person, I can assure you.
I am very sorry. The assurances of a Whig doxy come absolutely no ice with me. If you do not oblige me in this particular, I shall have to search you.
My lord, I am a maiden of unimpeachable integrity and modesty. What would you, sir? Would you undo me?
No, definitely not. Definitely, I'm a British officer and a gentleman. Now, don't panic, Rawdon. Don't panic. Keep calm. This is a tricky situation. Yes. I have it.
Mistress Giger, you will be confined here under lock and key until I can obtain the services of a loyalist Tory matron who will search your, search.
Yes.
Sergeant? No sooner had the key turned in the lock, but Mistress Giger whips out her paper, learns its contents by heart, folds it into a pastel, and boom, swats it. The ensuing search, therefore, was futile. So, says Mistress Giger, as innocent as apple pie,
There now, my lord. I hope you are satisfied as to my integrity. And now, sir, if you really are a gentleman, you will open that door for me.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Right, sorry about this little misunderstanding. Mrs. Giger. Yes, sir.
and off she goes, cool as a cucumber, to deliver the letter to Sumter. Well, the commander of Fort Granby, a loyalist Tory called Maxwell, surrendered on condition that he kept all his loot. I agreed to that, much to the irritation of the strutting gamecock. But my action ensured the fort was captured with a minimum amount of time and no bloodshed. I advanced on to reduce Augusta. Later on, I fought at Utah Springs, the last major engagement. But after that, I went to General Greene because I felt that my services had not been sufficiently requited, and I resigned from active service.
But I have the satisfaction of joining my patron, General Washington, at Yorktown, observing the surrender of Lord Cornwallis, or more accurately, the surrender of Brigadier General Charles O'Hara, whilst Cornwallis sulked in his tent. I was one of the American officers who pointedly snubbed Butcher Tarleton. We refused to die or mess with him. It gave us great satisfaction when that murderer slunk away with Lord Cornwallis on the sloop Bonetta. Peace, blessed peace, returned to our free country. And I returned to Virginia, where I married my cousin, the divine Matilda Lee, the heiress of Stratford. Matilda presented me with 3 children. But after only 8 years of marriage, my Tilly died. I was still a young man, and I needed a wealthy wife. So I snaffled up Anne Hill Carter of the Shirley plantation. She presented me 4 sterling children, including my son, 5th son, Robert Edward. I served as governor of Virginia 3 times. During my governorship, General Washington appointed me a Major General, 2 stars on my shoulder, so I outranked my old friend, General F.Marion. Sent me to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, which I did without spilling blood. Then, 1799, George Washington, who had always favored me, perhaps because my mother Lucy had been his childhood sweetheart, died, father of our country. And I gave the funeral oration. First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen, second to none in the affecting and simple scenes of domestic life. But after the death of General Washington, my fortunes went downhill. I speculated. My speculations failed. I found myself in debtor's prison, where I wrote my memoirs of the campaign in the Southern Department. I'd always been a staunch Federalist. And in 1812, when Mr. Madison's war broke out, I went to Baltimore to my friend, Charles Hanson, the publisher, whose Federalist paper infuriated the Baltimore mob. They attacked his property, and we defended it. Some of the rioters were killed, in consequence of which we were arrested, put into Baltimore jail. The turnkeys then admitted the mob, and we were beaten up to cries of, "Let's tar and feather every damn British Tory. That's the way for American glory." Some of us were beaten to death, and I received injuries from which I think I will never recover. But let's not dwell on these unpleasantnesses. Rather, let us turn our minds to something far more pleasant. Siege and capture of Fort Motte. We just dined excellently here tonight. The very best meal I have tasted since that meal Mrs. Motte served us after the capture of Fort Motte. Now it is my great privilege to present to you that most gracious and distinguished of patriot ladies, Mrs. Rebecca Motte.
I have been asked to address you this evening about a very, very difficult time in my life, but one I shall always treasure as being one of the proudest moments of my life. I was born in Charleston to a very well-to-do family, and I was raised in that family to be a perfect hostess. Unfortunately, there was some tragedy early in my life, in that after my marriage, my brother Miles, who had just built a beautiful, beautiful home on King Street, Charleston, was lost with his entire family at sea. It was a bittersweet tragedy because I became the owner of his beautiful new home. And I lived there with my family, my husband, Jacob, who did start to ail at that time, and 3 of my daughters, all that was left of the 6 children I had born. And then our beautiful, beautiful city became attacked and overrun by the British Burnham. Now, I did all I could at that time. My poor husband was quite ill, unable to do much, and I had no funds to send to the cause. So what I did was I sent to my summer home, Buckhead, on the concrete, on the bluff, beautiful home he just built. And I sent for all servants, male servants who couldn't work, and made sure they had the supplies and the food necessary, of course all at my own expense, to come to Charleston and help fortify the city. Alas, that did not work. And we all know that Charleston fell. But to compound that, not only with my ailing husband, my 3 daughters, I was required to house up to 30 officers of the British Army. And there I am in my own home, trying to keep my daughters away from those British officers. Ailing husband upstairs, entertaining as a good hostess should. I would sit at table with them, and they would tell me that as a Whig woman, I was very lucky to share their meals, and that if they ever caught this general or that colonel or that officer, I would have first place and hanging in reparation for the kindness I had shown. And I sat there and I smiled and I said, liberty is liberty. And I don't care what you say. I believe this country will be. Well, Jacob and suffering ended in January of 1780. And I begged leave to go to my son's home, to remove myself from the city, and permission was granted. So I went to, we called it Buckhead at the time, St. Joseph's now, and settled in a beautiful home with my daughters. Now, my eldest had married to Thomas Pinckney, and of course he was serving in the army. And she, of course, was worried. But with me, she felt secure. I should have known it was too good to be true. No sooner had we really gotten up there and settled in and started our life, when here come the British again. Now, this time, instead of just merely coming in and living in my house and expecting me to feed them and take care of all those little things that a hostess would do for her guests, they said to me, "Madam, you can have one apartment for you and your daughters. We're taking over the rest of the house and the grounds. My beautiful gardens are now nothing but mud. Then they go and cut my trees and build a palisade, a parapet. They make it a fort. How was I to know that this beautiful, beautiful spot overlooking the river between Charleston and Camden would be the most perfect place to have a depot? But that's what they used it for. That was a way to make sure that goods from Charleston got to the British in Camden, and then messages could get back from Camden to Charleston. Well, I understood that there was something going on up towards Camden, overheard snatches of conversation at tables and such. And one day I told, you must remove yourself from this house. Where am I supposed to go? This is my home. Where are you sending me? There's another house over across the ravine. You can go live there. It was my overseer's friend. He expected me to go live where my overseer lives. Well, I understood shortly why he wanted me out. And this was Captain McPherson, I believe his name was. I can never get the rank straight. You'll have to forgive me. They have things on their shoulders and I can never figure out which is what. Anyway, turns out that American forces have surrounded my home, which is now being called Fort Motte. Well, I was very honored to have something named after the family. I just wish it hadn't been Fort. So I removed myself to the overseer's house and watched as the rest of my grounds are dug up for trenches by F.Marion and his men. And Colonel Lee is across the other way. And I hear a boom every so often. And they have brought a piece of artillery and they're shooting at my house. Oh, joy. Well, I figured we couldn't get any worse. I mean, they've dug up my yard. They've cut down all my trees. They're shooting a cannon at my house. Nothing else can happen, right? Wrong. One more time, I am paid a visit by Colonel Lee and was he General, Colonel, well, wonderful man, F.Marion. Not what one would call a prepossessing figure, but I think he had a kind heart. And Colonel Lee comes to me and says, Madam, we have something to beg of you. And I said, yes, I'm not sure what else I can give you. The British have my house in Charleston. They have my house here. I have no sons. I'm out of money. What more can I give you? And Colonel Lee says, Madam, we need to remove the British from your house. I said, there are 165 men in there and officers. How do you propose to get the British out of my house if firing your cannon at it hasn't worked yet? Madam, Lord Rawdon is right over there. Do you see the fires in there? Yes, I saw them last night. Madam, he's going to come and reinforcements. Our only choice is to Burnham. Excuse me? Madam, we need to burn your house. Oh, Shadow? Well, I'd be gratified for you to do that. I mean, if we have to remove Burnham, that's one of the best ways to do it, isn't it? Is to burn it. Colonel Lee, I am more than happy to give this little bit more to the cause. If this will ensure our liberty further on down the road, you have my permission. Now, the funny thing is about my brother is that he had interests all over the world. And he'd been given by someone in the East Indies a bow and arrow. And I wasn't sure how they planned to get fire to my roof. They're still about 400 yards because he was very apologetic. He looked at me and he said, I beg your pardon. Nathan Savage. A very pleasant young man. I hope his parents were very proud of him. He had like a sling, something that would sling this thing. He had all the pitch and whatever. When he lit it, it wouldn't go out, even if you blew on it. And he flung it onto my roof. And being that it had been hot and it had been rain, the roof went up pretty quickly. And he threw a couple more on there just to be sure that it would catch. And then when the British came up trying to get the shingles off, they would fire the cannon at them. And of course, the muskets. I don't think the muskets were very effective, but the cannon certainly was. And I stood there. I said, I wish I had a picture of Stukes. Well, it turned out that there was a great deal of gunpowder in the house. And Captain McPherson decided that he really didn't want to be his maker at that moment. So he said, everybody out. And they ran into his arms, believing Americans, and surrendered. At that point, F.Marion and Colonel Lee made sure that my house, the roof fire was put out. And I did not lose too much, and I was able to live, and it needed some repair. And to show my gratitude that evening, I invited F.Marion, and I invited Colonel Lee, and their British officer prisoners to dine with me, albeit at the overseer's house. Now, we were having a wonderful dinner, and at least I was able to make some sallies, which the British officers had to spit and swallow. When somebody comes in and whispers General F.Marion's ear, and he jumps up and he says, I will not have it, by God. I will have their bloody heads. Now, such language at a dinner table. I was appalled. I mean, really, I know he was a militia officer, but no. And we all left up, raced down to see what he was talking about. Well, it appears Colonel Lee's men had found some Tories that they were not very obliged to, and they decided to hang them. Well, two of the men had already expired, but the third one was cut down, and as he was still alive, he was preserved. And General Marion said, it is my order that no one is to manhandle any more of these men. I am in command here, and my order shall stand, because whatever you do to one of them, I will certainly do to you. Now, it shows me the quality of the man, and how difficult it must have been for him to have to come and ask for a woman to give up her last vestige of well, truly. And so that was the end of the story. It was quite exciting, now that I look back on it. Unfortunately, my son-in-law, Thomas Pinckney, was wounded at Camden. I wouldn't have to worry about him for quite a while. The other two married well. And now I look forward to a time of free peace and plenty. I have a lot of work to do. All my fortunes have been pretty much dispersed. My husband, before his death and before the war, had pledged a lot of his future income to cover debt. And he is a man of honor, and I will honor his memory. And I will see that those debts are covered. If you would not mind, thank you for your indulgence in allowing me to remain on it.